morning, HPC. Well done. Wonder how you're doing this morning. Hope you've had a good time reading the scriptures. Another long passage, long bit of narrative, which I thought was good. I hope you've got plans this weekend, and I hope that your plans this weekend will include the hows and the whens of you reading the scriptures. Once again, I need to just on a Friday just work out when I'm going to read my Bible because of the change of routine in the Graham household. Perhaps that isn't a problem for you, but if it is, let me encourage you to make a plan now for how you're going to do that. Do pause this video if you haven't yet read the Bible and go and do that, otherwise I'm not sure it'll make too much sense. We're going to look at chapters 1 Samuel 25 and 26, but really I'm just going to focus this on chapter 25 of 1 Samuel, as our American cousins would call it. And this chapter teaches us how God rescues his people from their own stupidity, how he restrains them from executing their sinful plans, and sometimes how he stops, he intercepts us on the way to what would prove to be spiritual disaster. We meet two characters right at the beginning of the chapter. One is described as mean and surly, and the other intelligent and beautiful. They're the husband and wife team, although how much of a team they are I'm not quite sure. Nabal and Abigail. Now Nabal's name means fool, and he more than lives up to that name, sadly. In fact, everyone who knows him agrees that. So if you look at verses 17 and 21 and 25, different people all recognise that he is a prize plonker. And in his response to David, verses 10 and 11 of chapter 25, we find out he's a complete blockhead. The way David sees it is that Nabal is celebrating with his labourers the fruits of a good harvest. Sheep shearing was slightly like a harvest festival is today, really, and he was enjoying a bit of a party. The goodness of the year was all around him and he was feeling merry. And David felt that one of the reasons that Nabal had had such a good year in the sheep department was because he and his men in their wilderness hideout had protected this man's flock, and they hadn't decided they would just grab one and have it on the barbecue, but actually they had done all they could to keep wild animals away and those kind of things. And Nabal just says, jog on, you freeloader, or other words to that effect. But he's pretty rude, he's pretty to the point, and he doesn't think that David deserves anything. So David's not best pleased, and we get a sense of what's coming in verse 13, because the author of 1 Samuel uses the word sword 3 times in one verse. We know things are going to go badly for Nabal, but actually not just Nabal. Things are going to go badly for Nabal and all the men in his household. That's what David says. But the interesting thing is that actually things are going to go badly for David as well if he carries out this plan. If he massacres an entire group of men, it will forever be on his conscience. We see that in verse 31. And wise and beautiful Abigail prevents this from happening, both by her flattery and by her gifts. But actually it is the Lord who is protecting both of them. Both David and Abigail acknowledge that. Have a look at verses 26, 32, 34 and 39. The Lord, in his kindness, stops David from killing Nabal. Now, the clear teaching of both Old and New Testaments is that believers should never act in personal vengeance, but in the words of Proverbs chapter 20, recognise that the Lord will deliver them and wait for him. Deuteronomy 32, it says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And that's picked up in Hebrews 10 and Romans 12. Now, while vengeance sounds quite negative to our ears, in the Bible it's always to do with justice. It's always to do with those who deserve judgment receiving it. And God is the right person to execute that judgment. As a Christian, you and I can have confidence that at the right time and in the right way, God's vengeance will shine forth, to use the words of Psalm 94. In other words, full justice will be achieved. And we see that in 1 Samuel, don't we? In 1 Samuel chapter 25, actually it does go badly for Nabal. But not at David's hand, at the Lord's hand. I think we see in this story that God sometimes wonderfully frustrates the plans of his people for their good. Just like David's plan to kill Nabal and all the men in his camp, and that actually that is a mercy when God does that. Now, I don't think I've got the spiritual maturity to see, like David and like Abigail, that the Lord's frustration of my plans is sometimes for my good. That he is keeping me from sin. But it's a great thing, I think, for me to pray that I would have that maturity and that understanding. Have a really good day, HPC, and a really good weekend. And I wonder if sometimes when things don't go your way, you might recognise behind that frustration the Lord's hand and his kindness in stopping us on the road to sin.